Hi, this is Silent Generation. I'm Joseph.
I'm Nathan.
And this week's episode is on Chautauquas. I think this is one of the topics that people aren't going to immediately recognize from the name of it. Maybe the word is interesting enough that people will click it. But Chautauquas were a movement out of the 1870s in America that was about education and enrichment for adults. And then it's still alive today in a very modified form. But it's very American, and it ties in with the last two things we've talked about with summer camps and Boy Scouts. It was Americans in the outdoors trying to improve themselves.
Yeah, I had no idea what Chautauqua was before this week. You probably know about it just because of your grandparents in upstate New York, right?
I think maybe I'd kind of heard of it before, but the one who reminded me about it was David, our guest, on the, I even want to call it the Great Lakes Supremacy episode, but it's not that. It's
the Fresh Coast.
Fresh Coast episode. There you go.
Yeah. So we'll start out just by addressing, okay, what is a Chautauqua? So, of the topics we covered the last 3 weeks, this one is definitely the least focused on the outdoors. They were like sort of an excuse for like stingy Protestants to justify going on vacation and be in proximity to nature, but they weren't roughing it. So like Chautauquas were like, there were 4 main types, and they started in Chautauqua, New York.
Yeah. So it was formed by a like Methodist preacher who was trying to kind of improve the formal education for Sunday school teachers, get them on a similar curriculum and kind of professionalize it in a way that it had been pretty like unprofessionalized before. And so they went out to Chautauqua, New York, which was not in the middle of nowhere, like not complete rugged wilderness, but just like away from the cities that these people were in. I'd kind of see it as like a minimum effective dose of nature. Like how, like that's whenever I want to like get out of the city. I'm just like, all right, what's like a 4-hour drive from Chicago that is still doesn't look like, how short do I have to drive to see not Chicago, basically? So I kind of get what they're going for there.
Yeah. And Chautauqua, New York is sort of close to Buffalo. That's the nearest like big metro area.
Yeah. And it's still like an hour and a half away from that, basically.
Yeah.
But yeah, so they started like hosting these kind of like learning seminars, and then it always contains this religious element to it, but it was speaker series. And it was education, and it was in outdoor settings or kind of like covered settings and during the summer.
Yeah. And it was usually like in proximity to a body of water, a lake, or maybe a river.
Yeah.
But we'll talk about the Chautauqua Institution a lot more later. But the original site where the first Chautauqua happened is the site of one of the 5 continually operating Chautauquas. And the Chautauqua Institution, it's still this like very eminent summer camp for adults where they do all of these different lectures and concerts, and they have like permanent buildings that are used for things like operas and symphonies and fine arts, things like that.
Yeah. It's it kind of makes sense that it's still around, like being the first one. No one kind of let it like fade away, even though it came close to collapsing at like 2 different points, they said, I think in the 80s and then in the Great Depression. But yeah, it's still here. It pops up in the news every so often, as we'll talk about later.
Yeah, so that's the first type of Chautauqua to like sort of categorize. The second are the independent Chautauquas.
Yeah, so these are the ones, they're also called the daughter Chautauquas, and these ones were like formed with pretty direct like teaching and education from people from the original Chautauqua Institute. And so they were formed on kind of permanent areas, or at least an area that wasn't being used in the summer. And so there are ones that are still around. There's one in Colorado. There's one serving the Midwest. That's, I guess it's in Ohio. I'm trying to think what city it's close to, but it's on the lake. But yeah. And so those like kept decently close to the original Chautauqua ideas. They have speaker series. They have music, light religious bent. But you notice some differences between them.
I mean, there's the Lakeside Chautauqua, which is Methodist, and it's much closer to say like a church camp. Yeah. Its programming is like almost entirely centered on religion. And then there's another one I think called the Colorado Chautauqua. And that one has also been continuously operating, but it's now like almost entirely secular. Their programming doesn't have much to do with religion.
I'm going to guess it's a little more recreational as well. I mean, they're just going to have more like nature and things to do.
That one is the only year-long operating Chautauqua.
Yeah.
So you can be pretty, they can differ quite a lot. That's one of the benefits of this being a decentralized movement. People in different communities can adapt the Chautauqua model to something that fits their community better.
Yeah, it was. And So yeah, they actually had they had newspapers about Chautauquas, magazines, and they had a correspondence course as well, where you could learn the elements of organizing your Chautauqua. But the way that this got to most people was not through the little place in upstate New York or through the permanent independent Chautauquas. It was actually through tent Chautauquas or circuit Chautauquas, which were ones that traveled America, and they would just set up a tent in a place a little bit outside of town and host the speaker series. And everything.
Yeah, so this is the third sort of category. And so when I think about circuit Chautauquas, I think about circuses, because this is probably the same sort of momentous occasion as a circus coming to town, where, everyone would hear about it, and it was an annual affair that people would get really excited for. And so I did actually read too that circuit Chautauquas, they were a bit less prestigious, they were a bit less focused on education. One example being that they would include animal acts as part of the variety of things that were shown and done at Chautauquas, which does give circus vibes.
Yeah, that's just jumping the shark. It's one thing as you get more and more just straight entertainment musical acts, but if you have I don't know, a bear balancing something on its nose, you're kind of lost the plot of what Chautauquas were about.
Yeah. And then the fourth category to talk about are revival Chautauquas. So these are Chautauquas that were started after the 1930s, once the movement kind of died down. They're essentially daughter Chautauquas, but they
I would say they're more I think from the one I was reading about, it seemed to be kind of inspired by the tent Chautauquas, the temporary nature of it and the kind of grassroots nature of it too.
Yeah, I mean, all of these vary quite a bit, but I think that generally the revival ones, they tend to focus on what are sort of historical reenactments, or no, I shouldn't say it like that, historical impersonations. There are some contexts in which you can say you're a Chautauquan, and that doesn't refer to you going to any of these Chautauquas per se. It can actually refer to this performance where you embody a historical figure, and you take audience questions and you answer the questions in character. It's this really sort of unique style of teaching and learning that I haven't seen anywhere else.
Yeah. From what I could find about it, that seemed to come out of North Dakota, basically, this style of Chautauqua. And it was them looking back at the whole Chautauqua thing, and they saw that sometimes in Chautauquas, people would reenact historic speakers, if this is a Chautauqua in the 1920s, someone would dress up as Abraham Lincoln, who was, increasingly receding from the public imagination, but needed to be kind of
kept
brought
alive
back to life through impersonation. It's so interesting that they looked back and they saw all the stuff that Chautauquas were about, and they really grabbed that from it. And it seems to be very affiliated with local historical societies and boards of education and stuff. So I think it really admires that grassroots effort, but it ends up being a little bit top down because you're dealing with governments and stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll talk about that more later.
Yeah. I mean, it is we're going to have a whole section where we just talk about what happened at Chautauquas, because if you're doing surface level research on this, it's actually kind of hard to figure out what they're actually doing at these things. You hear adult education movement, that has religious undertones and overtones, but you can't, we actually had to do quite a bit of digging to figure out what was actually going on at these things.
Yeah. In one of the videos I watched on it, they said that it's almost intentionally hard to describe. It's hard to kind of put it into one sentence. And I do recommend our listeners to watch one of the documentaries we'll link or something to get a sense of what it actually looks like. But if you just picture in your mind's eye, a modern Chautauqua is a lot of old white people sitting in a big covered amphitheater listening to a very educated person give a presentation on a I don't know, an intelligent but accessible topic.
Yeah, I mean, I feel modern Chautauquas are not a very aesthetic affair. I wonder, no. I didn't look at too many images of older ones, but there is I do wish it had some sort of aesthetic though, because I think that would add to the experience, but it's very stripped down in a Protestant way. Although, as I'm about to mention, so we're going to now talk about the origins of Chautauqua. So as you mentioned, first Chautauqua began as a Sunday school training camp in 1874, and it was jointly started by an industrialist and a Methodist minister. And one thing, though, that's important to note is the Chautauquas were largely non-denominational. And so you could be a Protestant or a Catholic or maybe even other religions. And the sermons were given in a way generally that like wasn't too offensive to other denominations.
Yeah. It was like, so this was all happening during the Great Awakening, which was a crazy period of like religious fervor in America, and specifically in upstate New York. They called this area, or historians called it, looking back, the burned over district, because there was so many like fiery revivals. There was like no one left to convert, basically. And so compared to all that, Chautauquas seems so like just mild mannered and just like a kind of low grade Protestantism that I think was more in line with like a majority of people, but not with the minority. They were like just a quick drive over to. I mean, this is the 1870s. They weren't driving. But yeah, other stuff in that area at the same time, like much earlier was Latter-day Saints in the 1830s and 40s. Like that's where Joseph Smith was. That's where he found the golden tablets and all that. Seventh-day Adventists are technically from Michigan, but their origins were in the Millerites in upstate New York. The Shakers, that was a utopian cult, and they're remembered mostly for their furniture nowadays. And then the Oneida Society, if you've heard of them.
Never heard of them.
Have you heard of the silverware, like Oneida silverware? Seen that brand?
I haven't actually.
Nope, it's just a regular schmegular like brand of silverware, but it has its origins in this utopian cult at the time. But yeah, Chautauquans had their eyes not on utopia, but on just like a gradual improvement of America, turning America into a utopia, not like living separate from it.
Yeah. And to get back to the first Chautauqua, it was meant to improve Sunday school teachers' instruction abilities. And back at the time, this was when like Americans were first starting to consider having public education. They were building libraries. They started the scouting movement. You know, they were starting to think about like educating the public in different ways outside of just schools.
Yeah.
And one of the ways they thought about this was Sunday schools. So at the time, Sunday schools, like they were not just about religion. They were teaching students how to read, how to write, math, different things like that.
Yeah, it just seems like even before we were kind of done fully developing a public education system, people were already finding faults with it and seeing that it was missing parts and trying to fill it in through scouting or through Sunday school. And I feel like it was like, let them finish. We just haven't built out a full comprehensive education system across the country. You know, I mean, at this period, a lot of people, if kids were in school, they were in one-room schoolhouses, you know, like different ages of kids all saddled together trying to learn the same stuff. Like there was a lot of headways needed to be made in education. So, yeah. And this is, the Chautauquas were like a continuation of this earlier Lyceum movement, which was, I don't know, I'm always interested in the like Greek revival in the 1800s in America. But this was one of the bits of that where people saw themselves as trying to like, you know, like that America, to be this great democratic country, has to look to Greece and these ideals of teaching and edifying, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good word for this week's episode, edifying.
Yeah, it comes up a lot in here in all the stuff I read. Yeah.
It means, I mean, the definition I know off the top of my head is like when something is instructional as to be morally uplifting.
Oh, yeah.
How would you define it?
No, that. I would just say that. That's good.
Yeah. I know that word from when I studied for the GRE for grad school. Yeah. And then all of these like sort of education movements, they were popular at the time because the public was thinking about their own public education, because they had this widespread belief that in order to have a successful democracy, the American public needed to be well educated. And so people were invested in their own learning in this way that like people aren't now. Like we take it for granted. Back then they were creating the institutions of learning, like, and they had a say in like how those institutions were built.
Yeah.
Yeah. As mentioned, the first Chautauqua happened in 1874. The following year in 1875, acting president Ulyses S Grant actually visited the second Chautauqua, because his Methodist pastor in Galena went on to found the now famous Chautauqua Institution in New York in 1974 and summoned President Grant to participate there the following summer. And so this brought the Chautauqua movement national attention and popularized it, which is kind of crazy because like the fact that
it had just started. It was a year in and he already like popped by.
I know. There have actually been, I think, 7 presidents that have gone to Chautauquas, and most of them as sitting or acting presidents. So there's only been one that's spoken there. But it's interesting that they got one to visit it so quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then what exactly is so appealing about Chautauqua? I heard on a video that like, you know, it offered people a way to go on vacations and justify them on the grounds that they were educational and edifying, that vocab word. The people that went to Chautauquas were presumably extremely religious, like in the Protestant work ethic way. and they couldn't justify taking a month off otherwise, because usually they go to Chautauquas for like maybe a week, maybe 2, maybe 3, maybe 4.
Yeah.
And so that was a lot of time. And these were people who came from a culture that had just industrialized. And so the thought of going away and just being in nature for that long was probably a bit foreign at first.
Yeah.
They had to figure out a way to justify it.
I don't know if the average like early Chautauqua attendee would be super religious, but I think like just religious enough for them to be like, you know, if I'm going to take this time off and go somewhere, like it should be X percentage recreation, X percentage, religious.
Yeah. I mean, I think the whole country in the 1870s was probably pretty religious.
Yeah. Because, I'm sure like the Great Awakening, like even though it really affected the people who were actually living in those kind of crazy communities, like I'm sure it brought just the general level of religiosity like up as well.
Yeah. Because modern day Americans, they're used to this perspective that religiosity has just been one great downward decline. But there have been periods where it's gone back up again, like the age of anxiety in between the 2 world wars. People were like shocked by the horrors of the Holocaust. And then also there were like all of these strange scientific discoveries in terms of like physics. And people had actually started to become more religious. Like that's around when I think C.S. Lewis like found Christianity, and then he wrote the Chronicles of Narnia.
Yeah.
Like,
and that's when Chautauquas ended too. There's a lot of the writing I read about this said that like that mild-mannered Protestantism just wasn't what people wanted in a more fervored time, like the 1930s, where you had these like charismatic radio preachers talking like fire and brimstone stuff, and you go to the Chautauquas and it's just like, I don't know, a little mealy-mouthed compared to that.
Yeah. Okay, so what did people learn and experience at Chautauquas? So we're going to talk about a few things: sermons, lectures, historical impersonations, and music. There are other things that happened though, like as mentioned, some of them would randomly have animal acts. Okay, so the first one, as we mentioned, was sermons. We've already kind of covered a lot of the things that we have to say about those in the previous sections, but the first Chautauqua was an educational summer camp for laymen to learn how to be better Sunday school teachers, and those religious undertones never really went away.
No, yeah.
Yeah.
One of the videos I watched about the Chautauqua Institute, they show like a black preacher going up there and giving a very good sermon. And the crowd is mostly like old white people. And I was like, this is so nice. Like, how else would they see this? I had some friends who would want to like go to synagogue with me when I was a kid. There was like one of my Mormon friends went with me. And it was just so cool to see like an outsider's perspective on that. It's like a religious show and tell kind of thing. And then it said that at the at the Chautauqua Institute, there's 16 different religions represented by physical buildings there. So it's like having it like an embassy for each religion, kind of, in this little like community over there. So it's always had that kind of multi-denominational thing.
Were there Eastern religions? Do you remember?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, interesting.
In there, yeah.
And then in terms of like the secular realm, there were lectures. And so I actually went into a deep dive of one of the lectures that was really popular in the Chautauqua circuit. And so this was Acres of Diamonds by Russell Conwell. And he is said to have given this speech over 5,000 times.
I cannot imagine doing that. It is crazy. You must have known it so well.
Yeah, because I listened to the audiobook version of this on Spotify, and it was like an hour and a half. So it was really long. Yeah. And to be able to do that 5,000 times without it becoming rote, that is a skill in and of itself. But the audiobook I listened to, it seemed to have been a rendition of his speech that was given to a crowd in Philadelphia. And the main idea from Acres of Diamonds is this one line: "Get rich, young man, for money is power, and power ought to be in the hands of good people. I say you have no right to be poor." And listening to it, it was kind of like The Secret and the law of attraction.
Yeah, just like manifest. Like this idea of like you have no right to be poor. It kind of reminds me of the like stop being poor shirt thing, like that, of just like just be rich. Come on, man.
Yeah, because when I was reading about the speech before I listened to it, the way it was interpreted was basically like he had argued very strongly that you should be able to become wealthy in your own community, because the main sort of idea or story in Acres of Diamonds is this like anecdote he tells in the beginning, where he had this like Arabic tour guide who told him this story about someone who sold his land in order to then go in search of diamonds. But then the next person who bought his land found diamonds on the land that he sold.
Yeah.
And so it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, you need to go and like look in your community. And then Russell Conwell, he later talks about people in California who found gold and other sort of like anecdotal stories about people who found wealth in their community. And so the nice way to interpret it is sort of like it's, he's arguing against the grass is greener on the other side argument.
Yeah. This was during the industrial, even now, but rural areas have always experienced a brain drain as young people go to cities for more opportunities. But this must have been the first time that was happening in America. So people would have liked to hear a story of saying basically to young people, don't leave where you are, improve where you are.
I mean, I'm very for that sort of idea. It's a strong town's way of thinking. It's very communitarian. And I'm sort of living that. I still live in my hometown, Chicago. I can vibe with that. But actually listening to it, it was literally the law of attraction. He was just saying that wealthy people have gotten wealthy because they wanted to be wealthy. They wanted it. And you should just want it too.
It's great. Yeah, no, I can see that would resonate with Americans then and now.
Yeah. But there were other whack things about it. There's this really sort of a controversial bit that actually Howard Zinn had included in A People's History of the United States, and he'd criticized it. And so this is part of Conwell's speech. I say that you ought to get rich, and it is your duty to get rich. The men who get rich may be the most honest men you find in the community. Let me say here clearly, 98 out of the 100 of the rich men in America are honest. That is why they are rich. That is why they are trusted with money. That is why they carry on great enterprises and find plenty of people to work with them. It is because they are honest men. I sympathize with the poor, but the number of poor who are to be sympathized with is very small. To sympathize with a man whom God has punished for all his sins is to do wrong. Let us remember that there is not a poor person in the United States who is not made poor by his own shortcomings.
That sounds I don't know, something that Democrats would make up that Republicans say. That's like a cartoon.
Like a Mitt Romney thing?
Yeah. This sounds like a bit that Colbert would say back when he was a character,
Yeah.
It's just, I don't know. Things have gotten at least a little bit more nuanced now. I feel yes, the American right still believes this kind of in some way, but no. It's a pretty standard pulling yourself up from your bootstraps kind of thing. Well, but and then the kind of shaming people for being poor thing. I think of the line from The Fiddler on the Roof: "There is no shame in being poor, but no great honor either."
Yeah, that's a good quote.
I always like that.
Yeah. And one other thing he said that was kind of whack too was there's another part of the speech where he was very antiquated, and he started to list inventions by several women, including Joseph Marie Jacquard's invention of the Jacquard loom. But then he goes on to say that he's only talking about women's inventions, not to encourage the women in the room to go out and invent more, but to just show men that they should be able to do that at the bare minimum.
It's even women can do it. Oh, man.
Yeah. This is the sort of thing that was going on at Chautauquas. And this guy spoke at more Chautauquas than anyone else. And so, this isn't necessarily a religious lecture. It wasn't a sermon per se at all. It was largely more secular, but it has this sort of morality to it that you can see how people in the audience were going to the Chautauqua and then walking away with these sort of moral quandaries and moral questions. And it was supposed to be edifying. Even though I can see how flawed Acres of Diamonds was, I can see how it was meant to be didactic or instructional.
Yeah, if I was a person at that time, I'd probably leave that jazzed. I'd be like, hell yeah, it's time to go become an industrialist. Yeah.
It's a pretty good story. It starts out with this sort of creation myth almost. He's a good storyteller for sure.
It kind of reminds me of those Ty Lopez videos. Do you remember that guy?
Who's that?
He became kind of an internet meme, but he was a self-help guru scammer type of guy on YouTube, and he would have this video that people edited to death to make it funny, but it's him in his garage showing off his Lamborghinis. But then he turns out and it's no, it's not about the Lamborghinis, it's about my books here. I would trade all the Lamborghinis for my books because these are knowledge units. This is how you the idea is you get rich through knowledge and all that. He would have loved Chautauquas back in the day.
Yeah. I mean, I've talked about, how there's this link between NFTs and crypto and parkour and all of these other like dumb boy activities. And I feel like for some reason, I don't know how this slips in there, but I feel like they're usually also on some sort of bent where they're like, oh, I wake up every day, I read the Art of War, I read Stoicism, like philosophy.
Stoicism guys are a real thing.
Yeah. Honestly, when someone's into philosophy, it's often a red flag for me.
Yeah, you should like come across it. You should actively seek it out. No, Art of War is like famously car salesmen love it. There's like an old classic, This American Life, about just like a journalist embeds himself with a car salesman, just like trying to sell all the Hyundais for that month. And he's obsessed with the Art of War, which is just so funny. Like, dude, you're selling cars. Like, you are not on the battlefields of warring states period China.
Yeah. We have that book at my library. Doesn't get checked out.
No one's waging any ground wars in Asia, so they don't need it. Or selling cars.
And then the next thing that happened at Chautauquas was historical reenactments. Historical impersonations. There should really be a more specific term for this sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, that's what they're doing. They're kind of just calling this Chautauqua-ing now. Yeah. One organization I found online who's very involved in this angle of Chautauqua as a historical impersonation is Chautauqua, History Comes Alive, out of Greenville, South Carolina. They've been a thing since I think 1999, it says on there. It's always hard to pin down dates with these. But yeah, they like have a whole team of people who do different impersonations. They had a calendar. They have like current events coming up for people. But yeah, it's like it's historians getting to be theater kids for the day and like channeling these characters in history, these historical figures who they're often like reading so much about and trying to explain to people, but doing it in this very, very accessible way. So accessible that it's like done for kids a lot of times.
Yeah. I first realized this was connected or related to Chautauqua after watching this really bizarre YouTube video I'll link in the comments with this guy, Dr. Clay S. Jenkinson, who's a Rhodes Scholar. He's in character wearing a like Thomas Jefferson outfit. Yes, and he's right next to this like very bookish woman wearing a Mary Wollstonecraft outfit.
Yeah.
And they're not in character. They're just talking about Chautauqua, Chautauqua acting in general. But yeah, I realized that this was connected. Then I thought about how for the scouting episode, I actually found a video titled The Girl Scouts, which was by the Northeast Georgia History Center. And in it, there's some woman talking about how she like gets paid to dress up as Julia Gordon Lowe, the founder of the Girl Scouts. And she's in character and she answers questions. And you can tell that this like YouTube video was made like peak lockdown. Because that actually would have been like maybe like I can see like if you had all 30 kids on a Zoom call, one of the only things that would be exciting would maybe be that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I've never actually seen a Chautauqua performance, but it actually made me think about how when I was in high school, I took AP art history and I had this art history teacher who was really cool. And in between passing periods, between classes, we actually had 8 minutes, which is really long.
Yeah.
And we would play music for like 8 minutes straight. And so I was going to this class, AP art history, and I enter the room and the music goes from one song to then my teacher blasting Rococo by Arcade Fire. And she's wearing a whole like Rococo outfit.
Whoa.
And she's like dancing around the room.
I love that Miss Frizzle type energy. That's great.
Yeah. So I've never seen a Chautauqua performer, but I can see how there's like a lot of value in this, both for like the performer and the audience, but for the performer in particular, because like when you're sort of doing what's essentially method acting, but for someone who's like accomplished so much in history, I can see how getting in their head might like lead you to some conclusions that like are kind of like lead you to transcendental values and things like that.
Yeah, this Dr. Clay S. Jenkinson guy. So he was in Jefferson costume there, but he's done like tons of other characters. He's very self-aware about it. He was in the weird public access video that we'll link of him being interviewed. He talks about he has a friend who identifies forgeries in art museums.
Yeah.
And the friend was explaining, the people who do forgeries are miserable little people who've accomplished little in their life. And so they think that by attaching themselves to a greater historical figure, they actually can steal some of that value from it and they can attribute it to themselves. And then he looks at his friend like dressed up as Thomas Jefferson and he's like, but I'm just broad strokes here. Like I don't actually mean that. So he's aware that like it is a little weird for a grown man to be playing dress up and play acting, but it is for a good purpose. And it's like, it must be interesting for these historians to get into the heads of these like, characters throughout history. I can see that like the fervor they did these reenactments could maybe be more so in the 90s because, nowadays I think we're more critical of historical figures. People could call it like canceling historical figures. But by doing this impersonation thing, Jenkinson talks about that you are kind of like opening up these historical figures for interrogation. He would talk about times where like presenting with kids who I think have a looser grasp of what a character is sometimes, especially with younger kids. And so they just like ask him pointed questions like, you own slaves and stuff at him. And he says that he would always, if things got way too heavy, you have to break character. Like if something, like he was specifically talking about race in America. And he's like, when it comes to race in America, like I'm not going to try and like roll the dice and stay in character longer in pursuit of a better performance. Like at the end of the day, I don't want people walking away from this feeling hurt.
Yeah. I mean, people like dressing up in general, though. Like, I would rather people be dressing up as historical figures than anime characters.
Yeah, no. An alternate world where we don't have Comic-Con.
Oh, speaking of, did I tell you about how, like, well, she actually left recently, but there was a security guard at my library, and she told me that she likes to dress up as Goku at Comic-Cons.
That's amazing. It's so good.
Yeah.
Oh man, you couldn't beat that information out of me. I was dressing up at Goku at Comic-Con.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you had to do a Chautauqua historic impersonation, what historical figure would you choose?
I mean, I'd probably would want to do Ben Reitman because I've been thinking about him on and off since I was like 12.
So that's the hobo professor, right?
Yeah.
That we covered in the hobos episode. So he was the very educated guy who like opened up a hobo college in Chicago to teach skills to hobos.
Yeah. But he's very like, he was honestly very like hot-blooded, like so high tea. Like I can't imagine. But no, like he would be on stage just giving like hour-long talks on venereal disease and like prostitution, and he was very vulgar. I don't think I'd be able to do justice actually, even though I would like to kind of think about him more. Yeah. But I think another person I would maybe want to do like Chautauqua acting for would be like Christopher Lash. Oh. I've heard though that he in his personal life, he was very pessimistic and moody and brooding. I feel like I could channel that well. The only thing I would like, the place I feel like I could fall short with him is just like, I'm not like that into philosophy, and I don't think I ever will be. And I would just need someone to explain his work so much to me that to the point where it'd be like, okay, well, why don't you be Christopher Lash instead of, like, I don't have that much confidence in my ability to really understand everything he had to say. So
I gotta be able to think of a historical figure for you. But I think I would choose Gore Vidal. I just really like his outlook, and I think I can do a good impression of him too. I know he's got that very distinct like patrician tone. Yeah. But I just share a lot of like, I think kind of what you're talking about, moody, pessimistic with regards to politics and stuff. Like, I don't know. And also he passed away in 2012, and so much wild stuff has happened since then that it'd be fun to imagine his takes on stuff. If we just kept him away from alcohol and kept him alive a little bit longer, we could see his takes on Donald Trump and stuff like that.
Do you think he would have freaked out about Russiagate?
Yeah, sadly, actually. Yeah, that he would not have passed.
And the stuff in Kingway?
But yeah, maybe.
Yeah. But yeah, so the last sort of like thing that happened at Chautauquas I want to mention is music. So there were a lot of like concerts and with bands and singers that happen at Chautauquas. And the modern Chautauqua Institution, they have like a symphony and opera and ballet performances, all these things. But I found like two musical groups that I think were kind of interesting that like were both very active on Chautauqua circuits. The first one was the musician Bohumir Kryl. And he was actually an immigrant from Bohemia, modern day Czech Republic. And he immigrated to Chicago, and his band was called Bohumir Kryl's Bohemian Band. And it's interesting to like learn about him because, my family, my dad's side, they've been like, my dad grew up in Pilsen. It was when it was still a Czech neighborhood. And my great-grandfather, we moved to Chicago. He moved there. Yeah. And so when I read about like people, historical figures who were at least partly associated with like Bohemian Chicago, like the former mayor Antoine Cermak, was that his first name?
Yeah, Antonin or something like that.
Something like that. Yeah, but anyways, when I read about them, I'm like, oh yeah, like maybe one of my ancestors knew Bohumir Kryl. It's just interesting to read about them.
Yeah, it's so hard to imagine like a distinct Czech community. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
it's so assimilated. It's like there's nothing left. You know.
No,
Yeah.
there's still like Czech people in the southwest suburbs, like around Berwyn. Like for example, Bohumir, he went out to Berwyn by the 1960s and then I think died soon after. But I actually 2 birthdays ago, I went to the Southwest Burbs to go to a Bohemian restaurant.
Oh.
And I've been really hyped about it because I've never been to a Czech restaurant in my life, and it was actually very mid.
Oh.
But yeah, they're still over there.
Interesting. In my time in construction, I've only worked with one Czech guy. He was a countertop installer, and we called him Porno Dave because he would always be watching pornography on the job site. And so
It's not because he had a mustache.
He did have a mustache.
Oh, okay.
But nobody also watched pornography on the job sites.
Yeah.
I was actually just reading about like how you put in here that Bohumir Kryl moved out to Berwyn in Chicago, which is like a near suburb of Chicago. And I was reading about how it's now majority Latino, and it's a lot of Latinos who moved out of the neighborhood of Pilsen. So like almost in lockstep, as the Czechs moved from Pilsen out to Berwyn and then on, like then the Mexicans have been moving into Pilsen, into Berwyn, and then on. I don't know. It's a nice little pathway.
Yeah, no, I've heard this from other people. Like one time I was on a Zoom call and there was some random guy who'd mentioned his family lived in Chicago at one point in the Czech neighborhood, Pilsen. And so I was like, oh yeah, like that's really exciting. Like, you know, my family also used to live there. But then he was saying that he now lives in some sort of southwest suburb that I guess is on the wealthier side. And he was saying like, yeah, it's great. You know, like now that, you know, the Latinos, they're getting to move out here too. You know, they've risen economically, which, okay, that's okay. But my thing was just that he was celebrating people moving out to the suburbs. I was like,
as the sign of making it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's, I don't know, for a lot of people, that is the feeling of making it.
Yeah. And then another group I want to mention, they're the Fisk Jubilee Singers. So this is just another small example. They were a group of students from the Fisk University HBCU in Nashville, Tennessee. And they generally sang spirituals at Chautauquas. And the group is actually still active into the present day. Wow. But they're really famous. And they actually had one song from 1909 that was included in the United States Recording Registry, which is actually an archival music database or archive that's maintained by the Library of Congress.
Oh, wow. I know we have that for film. And so, yeah, it makes sense that we have that for music. But yeah.
Yeah. When I was in library school, we talked about the Library of Congress so much. They do.
I mean, you'd think they're the big one.
Yeah, they do so many things. Like, have you ever heard of the term subject headings? Do you know about those?
No.
They're basically a way to like standardize information across like library databases. But basically, when you want something to have like metadata that's associated with tags, like say, okay, this is an autobiography. Mm-hmm. Well, that's not a great example of a subject heading, but you know, they'll give you the subject heading that you should use in place of other synonyms. And it's a big deal to get them changed. Like at one point, the subject heading for undocumented people was illegal alien. And then there was a big campaign to get that changed to undocumented.
Interesting.
Yeah, but it's like a very central authority. So for university libraries, they can't individually change their subject headings until the Library of Congress does.
Wow.
Unless they're off the grid, which they wouldn't be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't realize it was so centrally controlled like that.
Yeah.
I don't know. I always think that like America is, I think in most ways, less federal than you'd think. But then you run up against stuff like that and you're like, oh, no, we have a pretty firm federal government actually. Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
And then so we just talked about a variety of acts. Yeah. So when you go to Chautauqua, you could see like lectures, sermons, music, a lot of different things might happen. And so this might start to make you think a little bit about vaudeville. Yeah. So there's actually a good amount you can say about the difference between Chautauquas and vaudeville because they were direct competitors of each other happening at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, they were like overlapping in the same time period. I think vaudeville was, more indoors, more conventional kind of theater things where like 10 Chautauquas had this seasonality to them. But yeah, really their bigger difference is just kind of in like at least 10 Chautauquas, even though 10 Chautauquas are looked down upon by like the real institution as being like too layman and being too entertainment focused, compared to vaudeville, they're still brainy. They like at least have the pretense of like lectures and sermons.
Yeah, Chautauquas were considered wholesome family entertainment that, yes, that was targeted towards adults, but you could bring your kids and you wouldn't feel embarrassed or ashamed of bringing them. Whereas like vaudeville was vulgar and it appealed to working class men.
Yeah, you get off the factory shift and you go see a vaudeville thing. I can't imagine you want to go see a sermon after that. Working in a sausage factory and you could just get a sermon about how it's your fault that you're poor. Like, that would suck.
Yeah, if you heard Acres of Diamonds.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Chautauqua might have lectures preaching historical impersonation and theater performances. Vaudeville, they'd have things like comedy sketches, minstrels, magicians, ventriloquists, musicians, dancers. And then as we covered in episode 30, movie theaters, they usually ended with a short film. So it was much more like you just sit back and laugh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
whereas with like a Chautauqua, you'd sit and you'd seriously consider how to like improve yourself as a human being.
Yeah. I don't know. I like the variety show format. I think it's kind of missing nowadays. I mean, I don't know. There hasn't been a late night talk show host I've liked since Craig Ferguson, and Conan O'Brien. I like those two guys, but that kind of format is also kind of going away. I know there was like a cabaret and burlesque revival, like neo cabaret starting in the 90s and also going into like the 2000s and 2010s. And then kind of going into that like speakeasy revival that happened around the Great Gatsby movie coming out. But like, I don't know, none of those really did it for me. They seem to come from like a horny angle that I don't like.
Yeah. Have you ever seen the tweet where like someone described cabaret as being like stripping for like steampunk people?
Yeah, no, it's the steampunk vibes there. It's just like, I don't know. It's like, you just know they play D&D as well, which nothing wrong with that, but it's just this overlapping of things. Like, it seems like it comes more from nerd culture, quote unquote, than anything else. And if there's one thing that annoys me, it's sex nerds.
Yeah. But if you're missing variety shows, there is a solution for you. Have you ever watched America's Got Talent?
Not willingly, no. Have I been forced to watch it by people to show me one really, really cool performance? Yes, I have.
Yeah. No, it's not that cool. I actually had a period in maybe the 7th or 8th grade where my family watched it. I saw the season with Jackie Ivanko and Prince Poppycock. If that rings a bell for anyone.
No, nothing.
Okay. But yeah, it is really lame. So I don't think a modern variety show is really going to be cooler than that.
No. I do think it's interesting to pit like just a stand-up comedian versus like that like 40-person Indian dance crew I heard about once. Yeah. Like they're just like, some of these like acts take so much like setup and so much like stagecraft, and then there's just a guy going up there making people laugh, and they're expected to compete in essentially the same metrics at the end of the day.
Yeah. Also, that just made me realize there's something I forgot to include in the docket. Okay, so have you ever seen a single episode of RuPaul's Drag Race?
No.
Okay. I haven't seen many, but I've seen a few, and there's actually a section, that's not how you say it, there's something that happens in RuPaul's Drag Race where all the drag queens, they dress up as characters and then they're in character interacting with each other. And that made me think about actually the historical impersonation, because there will be people where they're acting like Aretha Franklin and they'll be right next to some like anime bimbo and they're like in character talking to each other. And that kind of reminds me of Chautauqua.
Yeah, no, they're accidentally Chautauqua-ing, I guess. But
for entertainment. So it's more vaudeville.
Yeah. I mean, it totally is. I mean, vaudeville would have female impersonator parts. That's what they called like early drag stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then more on like modern day Chautauqua. So the Chautauqua Institute, the original one in upstate New York, in Chautauqua, New York. I kind of want to go there someday. From all the stuff I watched about it, it's so peaceful. It makes me think of that tweet that described, I guess it's a screenshot of a Google review that describes Whole Foods as hypnotically Caucasian. Because just like all the like B-roll and video of this is just like elderly couples holding hands within their little like printouts in their hands of all the day's events, and they're all trying to decide like, oh, do we go to this speaking series or do we watch some ballet? It's like summer camp for adults, basically.
Yeah, you'll go there in your mid-40s as a treat for all your hard work.
I think so. Yeah, I honestly, if I told my coworkers like that I was taking a week off to go to receive some edifying education in upstate New York, I'd get like, I think rightfully made fun of. Like that's not exactly something that a guy in his late 20s
all your
does.
Construction workers would be like, that makes sense.
They would not. I think my office workers would not be super understanding. But yeah, the field guys would just be like, I'm speaking a different language to them. Yeah, like, so you don't want to go to Cancun? No, I don't want to go to Cancun. I actually would love to go to Cancun.
Yeah. But yeah, the Chautauqua Institute offers 9 one-week sessions. And so the general format is the day starts out with a religious service, followed by a lecture, then a brief lunch, another lecture, a brief dinner, and then finally a concert. But there's other things that go on, and you can sign up for different things. Like there's definitely some like physical activity going on. I didn't look into that, but like walks or bike rides, things like that.
Yeah, it's very like recreation. There's like sports courts and stuff. There's sailing. I mean, it's on a beautiful lake.
Yeah.
But yeah, people will definitely get their like nature in, and everyone bikes around because it's pretty car free, basically. I mean, there's old people there, so they kind of ferry them around on golf carts and stuff. But I'm a golf cart apologist. Although I hate Florida broadly, I liked when I was down this Florida like housing development. It is fun to get around by a golf cart.
How fast can they go?
Not too 20 miles an hour. I'd say.
That's acceptable. If I got hit at 20 miles per hour, it'd be okay.
Yeah, I knew one kid in like high school was like run over by a golf cart. And he was fine. Like, you can survive.
Because for people that don't know, if you're hit at 30 miles per hour at less, 90% chance of survival. If you're hit at 40 or more, 10% chance. So 20. I mean, I can't imagine. It would still hurt, but you'd survive.
That's why I'm like one of those nerds who, I mean, you would agree with me on this because you don't drive, but I would like to see the Chicago speed limit lowered to 25 from 30 across the city. But I think I said that once around a group of like regular people, and I don't think they like that at all. But also one thing is that like the really fast e-bikes, like the class 3 e-bikes go to 28 miles an hour. So I think that's kind of fucked up because like if I'm asking I don't own a class 3 one, but I'm asking all the drivers to go at 25 and I'm like, oh, but I can go to 28 as a treat. So on principle, I don't really like those e-bikes.
Yeah.
But yeah, it just sounds like a great little environment and like beautiful. Upstate New York is crazy beautiful, I would say. It's a very like, I don't know, it's not as like raw nature as like the Colorado Rockies or, stuff in the Pacific Northwest. But it's just kind of cute,
It's more agrarian.
Yeah.
More pastoral.
Just like nice
I haven't
oak
been
trees
there,
and stuff.
I haven't been there, but I do want to go to Buffalo, New York.
Yeah. And the whole place is very like college campus feeling. Beautiful historic buildings from a variety of eras. Basically, the buildings go from like the 1870s to the 1920s or 30s when they started running out of money. And I think they started getting money again, and so they probably have some nice new buildings as well.
They have at least one building from the 90s.
Oh.
But yeah, as we mentioned, so they offer 9 one-week sessions. So some of the sessions they had from this year, to give you an idea of like what sort of themes are tackled at the Chautauqua Institution, some of the ones from this year were Art and Action, Building Community Through the Arts, The Future, the American Experiment, The Global Rise of Authoritarianism, and Past Informs Present, How to Harness History.
So these are themes for the whole week?
Yeah.
Interesting. My summer camp, we used to have theme weeks, but they were like Star Wars. We stopped having them. I remember like the one year I was a camper, like we just still had theme weeks, and I don't know, there's definitely one seemed a lot cooler than others. I can't imagine spending a whole week thinking about the rise of authoritarianism. I would definitely take some breaks for sailing in between.
Yeah. But yeah, going to the Chautauqua Institution is very competitive. Like I saw a video where someone had said that like at the end of each Chautauqua, after the week that they're there, they then immediately have to put a down deposit for the place that they stay each year so that they reserve it for the next year.
Yeah.
So I don't know how hard it is, but lodging is a major restriction that like limits the amount of people that can go to this. But I think I heard it was like 150,000 people a year go to the Chautauqua Institution.
Wow. Yeah, they have like a historic hotel there, but the idea is that you like get an inn with someone who has a cottage. Yeah, that's how you really experience Chautauqua. And then they're really beautiful little cottages, and everything's wood framed, or a lot of stuff seems to be. And I don't know how it hasn't burnt down yet. Because when I think of like wood framed architecture in upstate New York, I think of like the crazy Catskill resorts that were built, and most of those all burned down. Viewed pessimistically, I think people often joke about Jewish lightning, which is insurance fraud, insurance arson, and I just don't think that Chautauqua would ever do that to its beautiful buildings. But I think that a down on their luck Jewish resort owner would totally do that if it was dwindling.
Yeah, I mean that's like another reason maybe it's called the burnover district.
People were burning their shit down afterwards. So the whole recreation component of Chautauquas, they seem like a little like ashamed of it. In the documentary I watched, they're like, recreation is a very big part of self-development as well. It's like, hey, bro, it's fine. You're allowed to sail. Like, chill out. I don't know. So I guess there's a weird amount of Catholic guilt in this Protestant retreat.
Yeah. I mean, I'm always looking for ways that like my vacations can actually be productive. Like I could probably go on more like trips than I do, just because I'm looking for a good reason most of the time. And usually the reason I find is just visiting people that I know.
Yeah.
But I would go to a place for this kind of thing. I would also, I feel like if I were to find out about, say, like an exercise institution, like I love working out, I could see that also being like productive for a week. Instead of, mental exercise, you could do physical exercise.
Yeah, I've never really done a like a vacation for pure like recreation and fun. It's always been like basically like to visit family and stuff or friends. But yeah, hopefully this Denmark trip will be like the first kind of for myself trip that I've done ever. Well, since working.
It's going to be fun.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
But yeah, the modern day Chautauquas, like people keep on saying in all the videos about it, like it feels like you're taking a step back into the turn of the century. And what they like, whether they realize it or not, I think they're talking about like how it's actually nice urbanism. I guess it's also people not really having a job when you're there. That can feel very nice and vacation-y. But I don't know. I'm always interested in how Americans love to visit walkable places and then go right back home to very unwalkable places and kind of like learn nothing, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, I think I recently realized that this might be why people like street festivals so much, because I don't actually really enjoy them that much. I actually went to Dumpling Fest in Logan Square this weekend, and it was so crowded. Like, it wasn't even worth waiting in line to spend the tickets that we bought. Like, we literally just left. But I think that for the people who drive, they like going to street festivals because they're like, wow, I'm standing around outside in public. But I walk 5 miles a day. I do that kind of thing all the time. So I've never really gotten it. And then another note. So I think that like sometimes Americans look at places that have good urbanism that are walkable and they think that they're fake. Like the only places from their perspective that they think can afford to be that way are the most wealthy. And it's sort of like artificial. And that's a critique I sometimes hear about Disney World or Disneyland, which there are a lot of different reasons to critique Disney theme parks. But one of the ones I do hear is like, it's so nice. Real life can't be like that, which, okay, maybe real life can't be like Disney theme parks for a variety of reasons, but they can be walkable. Like, because the amount of like infrastructure you need to build for like a smaller walkable community with small streets is less than it is for like a like Sunbelt suburb, where like you need so much asphalt just to get from one side of town to the other. Like it actually costs less.
Yeah, I think if you like ask some American after they visit Paris, like, oh, don't you want more of that stuff where you are at home? I think they'd express to you some kind of like, oh, it's nice for like a small trip and small doses, but it's not like a realistic way to live. And I wish I could just assign them to shadow like a French person who works in Paris and just like, no, it's okay. You just have to buy your groceries more often. You don't go to Costco. Like, it's more possible than people think it is.
Yeah.
And so I think that would be a lot of Americans like kind of roughly voiced opinion, but for a more like academic version of that opinion, I was hate reading about Joel Kotkin recently, who's a like conservative writer who like kind of writes the case for that style of thinking. It's just like, listen, it's just not reasonable. Like that's an outmoded form. The only reason that places like Paris are like that is because they're forced to be like that from having already been built in a prior time. Like we recently have arrived at the actually correct way to do cities, and it's what people want.
Yeah. But I mean, I've always loved the analogy where like the 6 legacy transit cities in the country, New York City, Boston, Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, Chicago, San Francisco, they had been so built up by the turn of the century that basically the cities were like artificial mountains where then the transit systems that did exist managed to survive. Yeah. But if those like artificial, well, they weren't artificial, they were just man-made. But if those artificial barriers didn't exist, they would have just flattened the city if they could, but it was so much work to do it that they couldn't successfully urban renewal the entire city. Yeah.
Even if they wanted to, which they very much wanted to. Yeah, they wish they could. Yeah. They benefit from growth at the right time, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And as we'll get into about the kind of like divides between like Chautauqua people and regular Americans, as much as I hate car dependent suburbia, it seems like one of those few things that could actually link the kind of NPR Americans we're going to talk about, and then just more like non-coastal, middle of the road Americans. Because like not every coastal elite voter that people think about like lives in a tiny studio or dense place in New York City. A lot of like the "We believe in science" signs, they're in front of like a single family home in a suburb. So I feel like these two types of Americans would probably agree that like they don't want anything new built in their neighborhood and that the local highway needs just one more lane. I don't know. As much as I hate on suburbia, it seems like it's actually like the great flattening of the American experience that car-dependent suburbia has done. Like, shouldn't that unite us a bit? You know, if everyone drives to the same chain stores and like goes to the same stucco houses, like shouldn't that cause some kind of overlap in like values concerns? But I don't know.
There's a monoculture, but the thing is just like, I feel like there's so many different types of white people and it's really difficult to articulate it. Like, for example, you know, like my parents, the best way I can describe it is that they were sort of like beatnik-esque, and they had all of these like random friends that like would have bizarre jobs and were barely employed, but had a lot of money for some reason. And I can't articulate it well, but I meet people that like, I'd be like, oh, my parents would be friends with them. Yeah. You know?
It's hard to like narrow those subgroups down. Cause I'm like, as I like learn more about your family thing, it's like, yeah, it's not pure artists, you know?
Yeah, no.
But then also not like office stiffs either. And then not especially rich, but not like, I don't know. Yeah.
There's, in my family, it's like, there's a lot of like random intergenerational wealth that somehow gets passed from like one person to the other without it completely evaporating. So there's like some money, but no, overall though, it's like, I think my family, it's like my dad, you know, being from Pilsen, like I come from like an ethnic white background, which I don't sound like it in my voice, but like, I'm not say like Italian or Irish American, but like my family has had this like continuous relationship with the city. And I feel like that's maybe why I have such pseudo culturally conservative values and why like, you know, I think alcohol is bad and I want to get married and I don't agree with like a lot of the things that get pushed on me.
Yeah. You think it's because you're a white ethnic?
A little bit. Yeah. I think that's why I'm like a little bit socially conservative.
Yeah. I don't know. Whenever I think of white ethnic, I think of on that episode of the Adam Friedland show where they got the younger Cuomo.
Andrew Cuomo.
Yeah, they got Andrew Cuomo.
Or Chris Cuomo.
Chris Cuomo on there. And he Italian called Adam Friedland like another ethnic. And I was like, fascinating. This should be studied. Like I've never even thought of myself as an ethnic. Like
no, it took me a while to realize that. Cause yeah, my dad, again, he's like the only person he knew from Pilsen to stay in the city. He went to the north side. Yeah. Everyone else left. They all went to the southwest suburbs.
I think I just have these like pseudo WASP leanings that prevent me from being. I also feel like Irish Catholics are a different type of white ethnic too.
Yeah. I mean, my mom's side is Irish Catholic. And I kind of identify with that more actually because I'm Catholic and that's like a bit more of a sense of heritage than my dad's agnosticism. So
you have something to grab.
Yeah, something to grab onto. Okay, but back to the Chautauqua Institute. So this is the site of the Salman Rushdie assassination attempt.
Yeah. Such a weird way to bring like the Chautauqua back into public consciousness because it's just, you know, I mean, 150,000 people go there a year. Like it's not insignificant, but nothing newsworthy happens there. If anything, it's more people reporting on things that are newsworthy in a way and, you know, synthesizing it into lectures. But yeah, so Salman Rushdie has had a fatwa or a bounty on his head since publishing his book, The Satanic Verses in 1989. And like right after that fatwa came out, like he went into high security hiding basically before reemerging in the late 1990s. 2 translators of his books have been murdered, but not him, which is kind of crazy. But by 2022, like he kind of thought that the worst days were behind him. So he's been traveling without a security detail. But yeah, so during a speaking series, he was another person on stage, but this random guy came up and stabbed him multiple times. Rushdie survived, but he lost partial use of an arm and his eye. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's crazy to like know about this event now, or to think about this event now with the information we have about the audience. Yeah. This was at the Chautauqua Institution. This was a crowd of people with, in this house, we believe science is real science. And they watched someone get stabbed in front of them. And of course, there was a doctor in the audience who was able to rush up on stage.
I would think it's half doctors in there. I would think you'd get like an ER surgeon and like a thoracic surgeon competing to be the one who saves Salman Rushdie's life. That would be like, you'd be the toast of your dinner parties.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy to think that this happened there. So this is an example too of like a speaker who's been at the Chautauqua Institution, Salman Rushdie.
He's like the very typical, like he's exactly the type of person who would give speeches at this, like public intellectuals. Anyone who has that tag is going to pass through a Chautauqua speaking series at some point.
Yeah.
It's actually very surprised that I couldn't find that Gore Vidal had ever given a speech at a Chautauqua. It seems right up his alley.
Yeah. I feel like celebriticians that are popular amongst Democrat libs, they also get like a free pass to go and talk, like Stacey Abrams went and gave a speech.
That would track. But yeah, not to be all bleeding heart about this, but I like cannot imagine the type of person that like knife hidden away in their bag, like walks through this, like buys a ticket, goes to this idyllic paradise where you're just shaded by wonderful trees and there's historic architecture and little old people waddling around, and then you go and you stab someone with the intent to kill them. Like that's just so foreign to me. But that's like, yeah, it should be difficult to put yourself into the mind of an assassin. But yeah, and he was just a classic assassin type character, a young guy with like not much to lose, down on his luck, recently radicalized, and just kind of like saw his opportunity and took it.
Yeah, I mean, I can kind of like imagine though hot-blooded young men having such extreme ideological convictions that they do this sort of thing. Yeah. I wasn't one of those people when I was younger, but like the ideological convictions of the young are so intense.
Yeah. I mean, not to get all like frontal lobe talk, but like, I don't know, these people are always less than 25.
I think this guy was 24, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if it follows the observed rule that assassins are always shorter than their targets. That's I like read this one graphic about it and I can't get it out of my mind. But yeah, Gavrilo Princip was 5'3" and Franz Ferdinand was 6'1". Like that's a 10-inch gap between victim and assassin.
Well, also it's easier to hit your target if they're taller.
Large. Yeah, no, that was his mistake.
Yeah.
But yeah, and the next thing we're going to talk about, as I like briefly alluded to earlier, was just like, yeah, the type of Chautauqua people, and just broadly, I guess we titled this "Whiteness in the Humanities," which it's just I want to like, we're not those type of people. We're not like, we don't have that like kind of like, I don't know, acid in our voice, like the whiteness of the humanities. Like it's an observed thing.
Yeah. So I actually have a degree in the humanities. I studied visual and critical studies at the School Air Institute of Chicago, but I actually didn't really fully know what humanities meant until I was in college and I was required to take humanities courses. But I'd actually gone to the Chicago Humanities Festivals once when I was a high school student in AP European History because my teacher was giving out like extra credit if we went to see a lecture at the Chicago Humanities Festival. So me and my friend, we went to go see this lecturer give a talk on this other like academic who is this like scholar of Soviet culture. Forgot who it was. I don't know if I'll ever remember who it was, but I remember the audience just like was so old. Like someone who was 40 looked young there.
Yeah.
And I was there less than 18 with my friend. And yeah, it is like a very specific type of person who like has the free time and thinks they need to work on their character, their morality, and they need to reach some sort of like higher meaning in their lives. Yeah. Because you have to be like pretty comfortable, I think, to get past the point of worrying about your everyday needs and then think about, okay, what is my philosophical view on life?
Yeah, you've done all the other parts of Maslow's pyramid and now you need like that, self-attainment.
I know.
It's all kind of like this world we're talking about here. So, yeah, like the type who would go to Chautauquas, listen to NPR, have the tote bag, subscribe to the New Yorker, be a member of like their local like opera, arts council. I don't know. Like I was a member of the Chicago Architecture Center as well. I think I must be on the younger half of people who own memberships to that. And yeah, like going on architecture tours, like, yeah, they're trying to a chunk older, I would say, when it comes to like Frank Lloyd Wright enthusiasts.
Yeah. No, I definitely do a little bit of this like NPR American, which actually I'll explain that term in a second, but this NPR American like cultural stuff, here I am reading about Chautauqua for a week straight.
But I'm making you do it.
And I go to museums and I go on walking tours to learn about bricks. And yeah, I do these activities. But okay, where does NPR American come from? So after the Kyle Rittenhouse shooting, I think I saw a meme or a tweet. I forget which one of the two. But the three guys that Kyle Rittenhouse shot, I saw something describe them as 2 NPR Americans and 1 M&M American, which if you remember the details of who got shot is kind of funny, but I use that phrase actually in my head a lot, like NPR American, because it describes the type of liberal who has the sign, in this home we believe science is real, sign in front of their house.
Yeah.
And when I think about that type of person, I actually think about this personal trainer that I had after I sprained my foot. And he was this guy who actually specialized for people, specialized in fitness for people over 60, which I was his youngest client. And it was just because my body was a biomechanical mess and I needed to really build things from the ground up. But I was working with him and he was definitely this type of person. Like he lived in Evanston. He would talk about how much he hated Trump like all the time. And I just felt this like slight condescension a lot of the time. Like, for example, it was around the time of the pandemic. I'd mentioned Trump or Biden's, I guess it was Trump, but like the stimulus checks and, how I was excited to get them. And then he was like, oh yeah, they're going to help people like you. And I inferred from that, no, cause like if you made more than $70K a year, like you weren't.
Wait, so he was doing this as a personal trainer? Is this his side hustle or what's his?
I think he makes a good amount of money from it. I did not know that. But yeah, he lives in Evanston. It's for people who don't know, like Evanston, along with Oak Park, those two are probably the wokest suburbs. They're very nice. I have visited them. They're beautiful. I do like them actually too, but it's the place where you see the most of these signs in the Chicago area.
They're liberal rich. Everyone's driving Volvos, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I know they are driving nice cars because another time I had my then boyfriend at the time drop me off in his car, which was this like beat up 1990s car that was close to the end of its life. And he didn't know I was my boyfriend, but this guy he pursued was my friend, dropped me off. And then he like looked really uncomfortable. And I think he was weirded out by how beat up the car was. But yeah, just like all this like low key condescension. But yeah, I'm not, sorry, I'm kind of losing the thread, but I guess why am I bringing this up? Just because I guess there's a disconnect between like how I view myself and how I view the world and then how they view themselves and how they view the world. Because again, there are just like very different types of white people and it's really hard to really like delineate everything, you know?
I think that we're always trying to figure it out. Like I see on dating apps that thing of like the problems of like, I'm hoping that, and it's like, I'm hoping that you're not from a turkey trot family, meaning a family that does a run on Thanksgiving morning. Like these are the kind of stuff that like, they sound like all white people things basically, but like, I think we're looking for those little lines between the different types of white people. Yeah. But on your story with the personal trainer, like sometimes when I hear people's stories of like times they've received like class snobbery, it seems a little bit in their head, like they're perceiving things that weren't there. And I think it often says more about like the speaker in the story than like something they actually experienced. But yours is genuine. That is 100% that guy throwing shade at you. Like literally saying to someone like, you would need a stimulus check. That kind of stuff. I mean, this goes both ways because I've like told stories where I think that I've received like reverse snobbery from more like alternative and artsy people where they view me with suspicion. But that could also just could be me just like feeling like I'm receiving this. But it's also, I just think it's strange for a personal trainer to be class and status checking you. But that like, I don't know, even if he was making tons as a personal trainer, like, I guess this just goes to show that like not everything is about like raw money access. Like sometimes it is about like a kind of a class that doesn't exactly track with income brackets, you know?
Yeah.
I always think about that with like, why do I get along so well with my like rich clients when like the head carpenter on my site is closer to me in income, you know, than any of my clients and stuff. But it shows like, like culture does not track with income.
Yeah. Always. When I'm having a hard time and I just want to get along with people, honestly, like I just want to talk to people that went to CPS. Because I get along comfort with them
kind of thing. Yeah.
I get along with them so easily. I just feel like all the like weird sort of like power dynamics that other people project onto me and experience in daily life go away when I talk to other people that went to public school. Like they're just so happy to be in whatever position in life they're in usually. I mean, for myself too.
A kind of just general gratefulness.
Yeah, I'm very grateful. And I don't look at people trying to one-up them. I'm very impressed with myself by how far I've gone. Like honestly.
No, it's interesting because you went to a very striving high school. So I would think you wouldn't have like that would be a different experience from other like I would say general admission CPS kids versus selective enrollment CPS kids.
No, there was a little bit of that, you know, like when I was in high school, there were students that had gone to Montessori schools or Waldorf schools, and then I was in classrooms with them, and I felt uncomfortable. But I just learned to sort of push it aside eventually.
That's a theme in my exes.
Yeah.
I just haven't gone to Montessori schools. I don't know. I noticed it once and I was like, oh, I can't look too deep into that.
Yeah.
So as I've maybe hinted at, I kind of sympathize with this chunk of people, like this kind of like Fraser Crane side of the art world, I would say, to reference the 1990s sitcom and cornerstone of my entertainment tastes. But I'm kind of excited to enter that side of the world. I just feel like just from my side of the youth spectrum, like when I go to arts events, it's like, DIY art shows and stuff, which I would say is, if that's not the Fraser Crane side of the art world, maybe it's like the Mac DeMarco side. That's getting a little outdated now because I feel like he's losing his
or the 100 Gex side of the art world.
Yes, there you go.
Yeah.
The
Which actually, fun fact, I haven't brought this up in the podcast, but I actually met Laura Les from 100 Gex because they got married to someone that I went to college with.
Whoa.
But one time I was at like a house party and Laura Les was DJing.
Oh,
so
they're from Algonquin, right? That's what I heard.
Yeah, but then they moved to Chicago and they were going to school here.
Oh, wow.
I think at Columbia, but yeah, I met them.
Oh.
But yeah, I feel like my corner of the art world that I actually like the most is the one that we're currently in, because we're part of this like scene of sorts that doesn't have a name yet. And I've actually come up with one, but I don't want to say it yet, because as we found in this podcast, that
if you can put
once you put a name to something, it starts dying. But I've come up with a term that might work.
All right, we'll discuss after. But yeah, no, our friends are all in book clubs, and a lot of them generate art. And they all seem to know each other from like various different angles. And even though it's gotten to the point where like I can go, like I'm starting to see people when I go to stuff. Like I'll go to a concert at Shuba's and then I'll run into people like that I know. It's like, oh wow, I guess it does appear to be a rough scene.
I know, because like I was actually pretty antisocial up until like 2 years ago when our friend group that we met each other through formed. Because prior to that, like I had a lot of friends, but individually, and it's so much easier to have a friend group where you invite 100 people at once, and then you see who shows up, as opposed to just individually hanging out with people.
I guess before this, I was kind of like a kept man. I don't know. I was just dating someone, and I was just kind of just doing that.
On the south side.
Yeah, living in Hyde Park also, that was a little isolating in terms of seeing people.
Makes it hard.
Yeah.
And I was in like a desolate neighborhood, Avondale, before it got cool.
Yeah, you had to wait for the city.
And now I can invite people to Podlassie Club.
Exactly. And then so things we see in modern culture that are connected to the kind of Chautauqua line of thinking, but like, or at least owe something to Chautauquas. I think that the achieving class, the high achieving class, they still crave these like semi-recreational retreats,
Yeah.
I'm picturing like things actually called retreats, like a mindfulness retreat, or I guess people go on like ayahuasca, like vacations and stuff. They want like to receive more than just entertainment. They want to be like fundamentally changed by their time off work. Have you
ever been to a retreat?
Yeah, I took ayahuasca last year.
Yeah.
No, I'm lying. No.
Oh, okay.
I went on a leadership retreat in college, but yeah, it was just like at a summer camp.
I went on a retreat with Lady Gaga's Born This Way Foundation, which I'll talk about in the Lady Gaga episode in December. But otherwise, I was supposed to go on actually a cool retreat to MIT for makerspaces and libraries, but the pandemic had delayed that, and then it ended up being virtually, and I didn't get a free flight to Boston. But that would have been so cool. I really wish I got to go, because my like specialty in the library of sciences field is makerspaces.
Yeah.
And I missed out on that.
No, I always, man, when I toured my college, I saw their makerspace. I'm like, man, I'm going to use this so much. I did not.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I really like those.
Yeah. But on the retreats, when I hear about that, I think about the Succession episode Argestes. Sorry, I kind of forget how that's pronounced. Have you ever seen Succession?
No, I've like, and last week I was washing dishes and my little iPad in front of me, and I'm like, I'm gonna start Succession, and just like I just couldn't do it. Like it seems like I'm sure once I get going I'll really like it, but it just seems like a mammoth undertaking.
Yeah, I like it. I liked it. I trailed off. I didn't finish the series, but yeah, in this episode there's like a retreat called Argestes, and the people from Waystar Roco, the family in Succession, they're all at this retreat together, and they're running into people that they know, because I realized by thinking about this in the context of this episode that retreats, along with things like galas and political fundraisers, those are like third places for the elites of the world.
Yeah.
They're a chance for people of their income bracket to gather together and run into each other, because they don't often get that. They have to very intentionally seek out the people that they want to see because they're all around the globe most of the time.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I was trying to join the university club, the like private membership club here in Chicago, rub elbows with those type of people.
What would it take for you to join?
A lot of money.
How much?
It was like $2,500 one time payment, and then monthly it would be like $200, and then more if you want to use the gym.
That's not that bad.
I guess I was thinking about it, but it just doesn't. I don't know. I feel like
it's like, how much do you want to network? Honestly, I feel like networking as an idea is like a really dumb concept. It's Miami behavior. Like, no, because I want to genuinely form connections with people. I'm not trying to like use people. That's like the sort of thing that I want to get away from when I hang out with like people who went to CPS. Is I want genuine connection. I'm not trying to like social climb in any way.
Yeah. I remember we were hanging out, and there was like a friend of a friend there, and he makes movies, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I want to pick your brain. I have a character who's a construction manager in an upcoming piece, and I want to like get to know that." And I was like, "Oh, that's interesting. This person wants to use me. That's kind of nice."
Yeah.
But I don't know. I guess maybe I'm a networking apologist. I'm just an inveterate schmoozer. I love to hang out.
I offer help to friends a lot of the time in terms of like them applying to government jobs with the city. I give them like feedback. I've gotten people a lot of jobs with the library, not recently, but no, I'm willing to help people out. It's just the people who are like, I want to have high net worth friends of specific professions. It's like, there's nothing actually that advantageous about having a friend who's a doctor. Like I have doctor friends, and I'm not going to them for like medical diagnoses.
You never know when someone's going to come in handy. Not to sound like a user.
But doctors don't want to give you like
medical advice.
Yeah, they don't want to.
Yeah, they don't want to either. I mean, I don't always want to give people home improvement advice, but I end up doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah. People always make you work.
But lawyer friends, okay, I can see how that's helpful.
Yeah, no.
I feel like they would off the cuff love any time like a friend is like.
No, I think I've heard them complain about the same thing the doctors do.
Oh, they do?
People try and get.
But it would be an opportunity for them to learn TMI stuff about their friends.
I guess that's true. Yeah. But no, this whole world of like galas and stuff. Yeah, if you're a wealthy Chicago woman, I will rent myself out. Please take me to galas. I want to wear my suits. I want to go to like,
I've attended 3 galas and worked at one.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Maybe you're my in. But yeah, and then TED Talks. Big overlap kind of with Chautauquas. They're kind of, I don't know. There's like, there's too many articles online that already say TED Talks, the modern Chautauqua. So I don't even want to give that phrase any credence. But the TED Talks started in the 80s, and they came out of the whole Silicon Valley world bubble, I guess. And they always boast like the diversity of backgrounds in their speakers. But I think they just serve to like kind of enforce the values that Silicon Valley like sees in itself, that they are creative, iconoclastic, better than what came before, established business practices and stuff. And that because of all of this, they deserve less government oversight and that they should be trusted with the levers of power.
Yeah. I like TED Talks. As long as they're not TEDx Talks. The TEDx Talks are so like random and usually like not by people who even research the topic.
Yeah, those are the tent Chautauquas of TED Talks, basically. Because it's like, I imagine you do what's essentially a rough correspondence course in order to get your marketing materials to put on a TEDx talk. And then anyone can do them, as evidenced by when the comedian Sam Hyde snuck his way into giving one and turned into a big joke.
I feel like we do better than TED Talks in like 4 days of research than like they do. Things they like prepared months for.
No, yeah, there's just not enough like... they're not selective enough, basically.
Yeah.
But like unlike the whole institution, Chautauqua Institution and tent Chautauquas, where tent Chautauquas had more impact on the average American, I would say strict TED Talks have more impact on the average American because their videos have like 54 million views. And I was like forced to watch them in high school. Like I think it was one of the kind of like slow to egg kind of things of like, oh, you're gonna watch this TED Talk that I just saw.
I've shown them in my classes actually, because as you know, I teach at the Arts Foundation. I started the most recent term like this week, and I've done that before. I've shown them videos about like jewelry from TED Talks, which there aren't any good ones, but it's a last resort.
I think I'm skeptical of TED Talks because they do make me feel things. Like after watching a TED Talk, I'm like, wow, I think I should do whatever it is that they talked about in that. Like they're just too persuasive and swaying. They're really like nice graphics and confidently rehearsed stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so there's a lot of people who speak and give TED Talks will then give Chautauqua lectures. But I saw in one video that like it's very intentionally low tech at Chautauquas. Like they don't want you using cool projector graphics and stuff. So I think that's good. That kind of like limits them a bit. You have to rely purely on your like oratory skills.
Yeah. I mean, I would want to use some sort of graphic generally. I mean, we, as a podcast, we're not really interested in video, but we like the Pinterest boards, you know?
No, that's always cool.
I'd prefer that slightly. I haven't seen a Chautauqua lecture, so I can't compare the two. But
I know we're shit talking TEDx talks now, but it would be smart to grow the podcast by getting on a TEDx talk somewhere and talking about something.
I know.
All right, they just have to not listen to this one.
Yeah.
But yeah.
No. I
or we
would.
organize a TEDx talk and then
or we organize a Chautauqua.
Yeah.
That'd be cool.
Yeah, revitalize 10 Chautauquas. Rent a tent from the Chicago Tool Library and have a Chautauqua. That'd be pretty cool.
That'd be good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then to conclude, so how does Chautauqua fit in with the previous two episodes? Because this was the third installment on our short series on American culture and the outdoors. So how does Chautauqua fit in with Boy Scouts and summer camps?
Yeah. So they came out of the same period. I mean, they all came out of this like Civil War just ending kind of period of like, all right, looks like we are stuck together, like North and South. Like, what is the purpose of America? What can we do? And what can we do for children? And so Chautauquas are the least focused on like child development. It's kind of in a little more detached ways. Like you enrich the adults who will then go on and enrich the children through teaching. So it's like, it does happen eventually, but the focus is on the adults receiving the education.
I like that it focused on adults because I'm currently an adult librarian, but I've worked in library roles that were about like encouraging adults to pursue lifelong learning, you know, through maker spaces, things like that.
Yeah.
And people need to be interested in their own education. And Chautauquas, modern ones, they are the perfect event for people who are thinking about their own educations later in life.
Yeah. Yeah, I spoke on this earlier, but like I think America, like education is so important to America. I think like from my understanding, like our public education system, we took a lot more seriously than other countries as this kind of idea of public education arose in the 1800s. We saw it as like, you know, creating citizens, which was more important for us than for other countries.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Christopher Lasch, he has a chapter on Revolt to the Elites where he talks about how Americans, poor and rich, would talk to each other, and the poor would talk to rich people like they were of the same social class, which would never happen in Europe. And so the working class of America, they became more educated because they're able to use their knowledge freely in public debate in a way that just wouldn't happen in Europe. And then also, you know, we did have a bit more social mobility, which we probably shouldn't think of our society as being as socially mobile as we do for other reasons, but people had a reason to utilize their knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah, it speaks to a pretty like optimistic time in America, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's also like the kind of intentionality of it having to be outdoors is just, this would be a foreign concept 40 years before, you know? Like there just wasn't that gulf between city and rural life, even though cities have been around forever. Like this is just like an urbanizing America trying to like look to nature, like still one of America's greatest resources, and try and squeeze even more out of it. It's not just cool to look at and walk around, and like it should somehow like feed the American soul and brain.
Yeah. And I think that all three of these are potential solutions to the citizen versus consumer conundrum, which is something that I keep bringing up. But, you know, I think in the 21st century, people don't know how to be citizens. And all three of these, they really encourage people to think about like themselves as being members of communities and thinking about how to improve them.
Yeah. No, I don't know. It's like, I don't think of myself as a consumer. I think of myself as a citizen. I say that to myself, but do I even think of myself as a citizen? I don't know. I'm pretty civically minded. I think
once you have a child and you go to PTA meetings, you will.
Yeah, yes, I will be a force at PTA meetings. I mean, I already go to like aldermanic meetings and stuff sometimes.
Yeah.
I'm an active little citizen.
But I want to read off this list really quickly. Okay, so we did make a shorthand list, and I think this would be helpful for viewers. So these are statements that apply to all three. So Chautauqua, American summer camps, and the Scouting movement. All came out of the same period, shortly after the Civil War. All sought to return to nature. All saw that the standard educational system, as it was being developed at the time, was missing some key elements or needed an adult component. All taught people how to be citizens. All three movements were grassroots and decentralized in nature. And all three movements feel American because they connected people to a wide variety of American pastimes and cultural traditions.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening. Bye.